Ni hao. 我叫 Stephanie. Yeah, hi there. A bunch of you have stumbled onto my Weebly site. I'm so excited to finally have a portfolio site that has all of my projects. I'll put it down in the link in the show notes below, but I'm really excited. I've actually got 3 podcasts now. One is a direct project related to this channel about the Chinese language, learning and using the Chinese language. And 2 of the other ones are living overseas related, and there's a couple of other projects on there. And I'm pretty proud of my Instagram feed on showing life in China, at least in the expat bubble that I very, very specifically choose to live in. So check out my other projects if you're interested. Yes. Okay. So that's announcement number 1. And thank you for the folks who have found it all over wherever my social media stuff is and have clicked on there. I'm super excited. I've barely spread it around and I've already gotten a bunch of hits that I didn't expect on the site itself. So I think it's a good thing to have one site that has all of my crazy projects. This video is going to be about the Chinese language again. It's not a study video, it's what people are saying about the language. And I hope it's okay to read this kind of stuff. I'm not quite sure of the parameters of reading things that are available online for free. So if you happen to know that this is not okay to do according to YouTube standards, please let me know and I will yank the video down immediately. But I'm assuming since it's available online that it's okay to read it. I don't know. Let's see what happens. So this is from the Literary Hub, and again I have a bunch of Google searches, Google alerts that I just put out there with different terms on things that I'm constantly wanting to keep up to date on. I am crap at reading stuff, of going into newspapers and magazines because there's so many sources. I'm horrible at going to look for information outside of general social media, what I stumble across. So it's really nice to have the Google alerts to at least get some of the information that I'm missing just from my social media feed. To get out of the silos of the social media feeds that we tend to build for ourselves. So this one's from something called the Literary Hub, which looks like a literary online platform. And the title of it, and this is why it struck my fancy, is called On Falling in Love with the Language I've Spoken My Entire Life. Lucy Tan rediscovers Chinese through the fiction of Eileen Chang. Now wait a minute, I believe Eileen Chang, hold on, let me check my shelf. I think I have some Eileen Chang over here. Oh, I might have given that away already. Shoot. I'm pretty sure that I read a book of hers for a book group that I'm in. But anyway, let me keep going because that's just the name. This came out July 9th, 2018, so it's not too long, but it's been sitting in my to-do list for a while because I wasn't sure what to do with it, just to post it somewhere or what have you. But I've seen some other folks who are reading things that they find in print on their video and audio platforms, and I thought, let's give it a try, let's see what happens. So again, Lucy Tan, and Lucy, if for some reason you see this, I would love to interview you about this idea, this experience, and so much more about languages outside of the Chinese language as well, and especially the comparison. So Lucy, if you see this, I'd love to interview you for the Changing Scripts podcast, which is the audio offspring of this channel. All right, here we go. It's not too long, so let's see how we do this. I'm a little staler when I read, but I'll try to liven this up for you. So I'm not going to break the whole way through. I'll break when I'm done reading it. So I'm going to be looking over here. So, yep, there it is. The first fiction I ever read in Chinese was a short story by Eileen Chang, titled simply Love. I was in college at the time, and my Chinese language teacher had handed it out to the class. After I finished reading, I quietly began to cry. I can't tell this story without telling you what the language meant to me. My parents are Chinese American immigrants, and the first language I learned was Chinese. I spoke it almost exclusively until the very first day of preschool, when I learned the sentence, "Can I have some juice?" From then on, I spoke in English sentences. Chinese became the language I only spoke when compelled, with my family, who also spoke Chinese in the house, or when I was forced to practice it at a Chinese school on the weekends. I struggled against it, partly because I didn't possess the full range of vocabulary through which to express myself, and partly because it was a language in which I couldn't address my emotions. My parents did not like emotional conversations. They did not say, "I love you," On parents' visiting day at school, other kids' parents left them notes that said, "We're proud of you." My note said, "We hope you will continue to improve this year. Please read books other than the series The Babysitter's Club." The closest they had come to addressing the issue of emotion were the times they asked me, "Why are you crying?" By which they meant, "Stop crying." And so I tried never to cry in front of them. I held my tears through dinner. I cried only alone in my room or on the phone with friends. You can see why I picked this one. Okay, that's me, not her. Here we go again. It seemed to me that the heart was a dangerous territory for Chinese, and so I kept the two apart. It was in English that I said "I love you" to a boy for the first time, English in which I cursed aloud. In books written in English, the intricacies of feeling and mysteries of human existence were explored. It was in the love of this language that early on I found the determination to become a writer. But sitting there in the classroom as a college freshman, staring at those 300-some words that made up the Eileen Chang's short story, everything I knew was torn apart. No story written in English had ever made me felt what this story made me felt. It was the most profound reading experience I'd had with short fiction, and the story had been written in Chinese. It was as though the two worlds I was used to traveling between had suddenly collided. The story Love is seemingly simple. It's about a young woman who falls in love with the neighborhood young man after they meet briefly beneath a peach tree. Years later, after she lived a life of misfortune, she remembers this meeting with him and remarks upon the gifts of time, coincidence, and life. This is an excerpt from the story. You meet the one you meet amongst thousands and tens of thousands of people, amidst thousands and tens and thousands of years, in the boundless wildness of time, not a step sooner, not a step later. You chance upon each other, not saying much, only asking softly, "Oh, you are here also?" Again, that's an excerpt from Love by Eileen Chang, translated by Chow Mei Tang. What was striking to me about this story was the things that aren't said. The years in which the young woman is sold as a concubine hovers around the edges of the story, out of focus, but dark enough to illuminate the shining moments, the shining moment in her life that's described. So much is implied by the words "time passed." Nothing more is needed. For all I loved about the power of the language to name what can't be put into words, this, not naming it, had equal power. Subtle, too, are the narrative shifts in this piece. We think we are being told a story by the narrator until we arrive at the phrase, "she remembers." Suddenly, we jump forward in time where the narrator has been taken over by the young woman, who is now an old woman, looking back on her life, knowing what she has already lost. And what of the phrase she often speaks of that young man? To whom is she speaking, we wonder? What solace, what comfort has she found in her old age? Chang is a master of suggestion. Reading this story taught me that in fiction it's possible for some of the most poignant moments to linger out of sight, because, the story seems to say, the hard parts are beside the point. Like a dart piercing through the thinness of all the years of this woman's life is this singular encounter, a meeting with a man beneath a peach tree. As readers, we come away reminded that it is rare moments of love and light that we should let define our lives and give our existence focus. How compassionately Chang renders this story, and yet, what a cruel story. For a week, I walked around with Love tucked into my class notebooks, switching it from one to the other as I switched classes. The text took up barely half a page. I remember being surprised by the fact that each time I looked at it, I couldn't stop thinking about the young woman in the story and the life she'd left. I couldn't stop hearing that refrain. Thousands and ten thousands of people amidst thousands and 10,000s of years. I had an urge to call my mother, who lived in China at the time. I wanted to tell her that I felt closer to her somehow. Not because the story itself had anything to do with her, but because for the first time I felt moved by Chinese. I felt understood by this story. Of course I didn't do it. My parents and I don't use language in that way. To this day, I still have never said the words "I love you" to them in Chinese. Years later, in writing my first novel, I found myself telling my own love story. What We Were Promised is about many different kinds of love. Delivery. I'm going to start that over. Years later, in writing my first novel, I found myself telling my own love story. What We Were Promised is about many different kinds of love. Family love, lost love, stale love, and new love. My characters are Chinese and Chinese American, and they mostly speak Chinese. One of my early readers made an observation that stuck with me. Quote, "They so rarely tell each other what they're feeling," unquote. It occurred to me that I was writing the kind of dialogue I grew up hearing, where love is tactily understood. Love settles into the cracks of daily existence, paved over by the mundanity. I'm saying it wrong. Anyway, wear a coat, my mother would tell you. Eat more meat. Read different books. I love you, I love you, I love you. What I've learned after 20-some years of speaking both languages is that it's very American to say things out loud, and it's very Chinese to feel them quietly. "Oh, you are here also," the young man says to the young woman. In other words, I love you. And yet I love you would have cheapened things. By acknowledging the limitations of language, by letting everything else do the telling, we are treated to the depths of one human life. Maybe it was never that my parents were unwilling to say I love you. Maybe they sensed that the phrase itself was never enough. How insanely beautiful, that's the end of the piece. How insanely beautiful is that? I'm going to put the link below, and in that article she also has the link to the short story from Eileen Chang that she's talking about. And I do apologize for my emotional brief moments. Some of those pauses were my tears, not a pause in the writing itself. But this is probably why I haven't talked about this yet, actually, in all truth, is that it's hard for me to completely detach from this. I did grow up in a very 1980s over-talking American moment. Before the PC bubble hit, before, I don't know, it just felt like a moment where everybody was supposed to express everything all the time, and if you didn't express it, it wasn't real. And although I have learned to appreciate other ways of expressing one's emotions, I still struggle when people are not super blunt with what they think and feel and want. Very. Actually, most of my interpersonal conflicts come from a difference in expressing needs, wants, and desires. And I'm not just talking about my marital relationship, I'm talking about all relationships, professional and personal. It is one of the biggest gaps for me in English. As I slip into Chinese, because of course all of this relates to moving from one language to another, as I slip into Chinese, if I slip into speaking it with people who grew up in a similar environment that Lucy grew up in, where you do not say, and I've heard that more than one place from more than one person that grew up in this specific culture, will I adjust my expressions? I haven't actually said, other than the first week when I oh, hold on, it's too hot. Other than the first week when I learned the phrase "wo ai ni," and then was told that it's generally not said very much. Other than that week, I haven't really said that phrase very much. to people that it would be very appropriate, and that I definitely felt a strong emotion towards to say it too. So maybe that's happening. I don't know. I don't really have the ability vocally or even in written form yet, even though that is a stronger skill for me. I still don't have that ability to have emotional connections with people via language yet. In Chinese. In English, no problem. I can overexpress, or if I hold back enough, especially if it's online, I can underexpress my emotions, no problem. I can recognize the difference between expressing a lot and just doing, just showing people how you feel and how much you value them. I can see those nuances now, which I couldn't growing up. And I don't even think I could 10 years ago, or 13, 14, 15 years ago when I first moved to Asia. And I'm using the blanket statement of Asia because I think that this general show, don't tell so much over and over and over, show someone in your actions how you feel. And of course, it's not a straight black and white dichotomy. That would be a false statement to make. But generally speaking, in the East, if I could do the biggest blanket statement in the world, it is more of a show, don't tell. And in the West, oftentimes we'll even tell someone how deeply we feel about them, to ingratiate them towards us, even if we don't. Not always. We have sincere people on both sides, but if you have to overgeneralize, there is a big difference there, I think. And I think that's one of the things she's talking about, is that difference comes out in language. And I just think it was a beautiful, beautiful moment, because I've heard other people say this, and in the my Expat Rewind podcast, if you go to Capajo's interview, he talks about how he feels like he's more emotional in one language when he writes than in another. And so I think what Lucy's talking about here is she felt like she had to be expressive in this language because this language didn't give her leeway to do so. And once she realized that she could, but not necessarily in the same way, but she could, then she had both options. And then she could be her full self in either of them, as if we can be our full selves in any written form. Because there are automatic limitations to putting things, not just in the written form, but in the audio form. Whenever you capture an idea or a feeling or an emotion, it's automatically oversimplified. And there's almost no way to get around that. Sometimes I'll look back at a project and I'll think, gosh, there was so much more going on. I even remember there being so much more going on in my head that I wanted to get out. And there's only so fleshed out you can make an experience be understood in. There's only so well descriptive out that I don't even know what to say. That's how flustered I am by this. But I think this is a beautiful piece, and it really, really encompasses empowerment in one's first language or language of childhood, what have you, whatever you want to call it, and growing into another language and using whichever language or languages that you can to express yourself in whatever way you're able to do so in that. I think it's a beautiful, beautiful piece about the power and the limitations of language, and specifically about the Chinese language. And that's part of the reason why I want to read in Chinese, is I feel like a lot of stuff when it's transferred over into English is lost. And I'm here. I want to know what people are talking about. And I really love reading fiction, and I do read quite a bit of Chinese fiction translated into English. But wouldn't it be amazing just to read it in its natural language and to see what the author intended in its exactness without the translator's eyes? I have no problem with translators. I'm so excited they exist. Thank you to all translators. But I want to get past that in this language. I want to see the original intent. And how cool would it be to go back to, for example, like Waiting by Hajin? I would love to go back to his book, that book Waiting, and read it in Chinese, and and maybe probably reread it in English and see how different the experiences were. I can't wait to do that video, probably 2 or 3 years from now, but I look forward to doing things like that. I am interested in news items, current events, things that are trending, those kinds of things that are happening in real life, but literature is not completely off my radar. It's just a harder creature because it's a more creative, playful part of using language, and that's harder to learn. But Phil does it. I interviewed him for my podcast as well, and he's reading science fiction in Chinese after, 2 years of learning the language? So, I mean, that's inspiring. That is inspiring. All right, so anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this. Again, the links will be down in the show notes below. So if you've run across any other expressions of languages encapsulating and freeing people, especially when it comes to Chinese, please share them with me. I love stuff like this. I never thought I'd be super attracted to the identity part of cultural acculturation, language acculturation, or anything like that. But I find myself, the more I learn language, the more I find myself drawn to pieces like this. So thank you for sharing. Thank you for watching, and more soon. Satchian.